What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting with God at the center and real-world, first-hand experience. So, you may be wondering, what can I do to help this podcast? A couple of easy free ways. Not the kind you drive on, but a free way to support the podcast. Some very dry humor for you there. Scroll down if you're listening on Spotify or iTunes or perhaps some other platforms. Make sure you hit some stars, leave a review. It lets you leave a review. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. You should be getting, by God's grace, hopefully an episode every day. If you're subscribed to all 3 podcasts. If not, you may want to go in and check your settings. Anyway, if you want to step up to the next level and be an active participant of the tribe, check out goodshepherdtraining.com. There's a Patreon link on there. If you want to just check out Patreon, most of that content is for patrons only, but some of it is for everybody. You can go there and check out some shooting videos and things like that. Anyway, enough about with that. Plug in the bio if you want to skip it. Skip around 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Then we'll get into the main topic of the show, which is going to be on strikeouts. Striker-fired guns that struck out. They just flopped for whatever reason. Some of them may be really good guns. Some of them may be really crappy guns. Anyway, that's what today's episode is going to be about. Again, bio and then into the topic. If you want to skip the bio, skip around 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Who am I? A question we should all ask ourselves. I am, first and foremost, a servant of God, made in His very own image, a follower of Jesus Christ, a simple man called by God to the Great Commission to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Next, a little bit about my background and what God has allowed me to do and blessed me to do in life. Grew up what most would consider very poor in the backwoods of the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States, hunting and fishing. Joined the Marine Corps at 17. Did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. So a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran. Infantry assaultman. After the combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also a veteran of law enforcement. I served with LAPD. I was a sworn peace officer, a cop for LAPD. I worked regular patrol assignments and more specialized assignments. One of those more specialized assignments was warrant service, fugitive recovery. Also had some other law enforcement roles. I am an FBI certified firearms instructor and been certified by another 3-letter government agency in a lot of firearms and training things. I've also been a private contractor, worked in the private sector, pertaining to tactics and gunfighting and protecting America from enemies foreign and domestic. I served as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters in a large metropolitan area. That was our primary mission, to stop active shooters, which sadly are a thing in America today. I've also been blessed to do quite a bit of competition shooting. Started my first formal competitions even before joining the Marine Corps at 17. I had won more shooting competitions than I can remember. I have competed in all manner of disciplines in shooting. I've been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion, West Coast regional champion. Like I said, been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Mentioned hunting. I've hunted to put meat on the table. Starting when I was a child, I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide, hunting and slaying all manner of beast. And I don't apologize for that. Humbled to be the host of 3 podcasts. Simple Man Sermons, Alpha Male Podcast, and Gunfighter Life. Obviously, as things not mentioned, I've been blessed to do many other things. But, again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, a believer and follower of the Bible, the Word, Jesus Christ. And I don't apologize for that. With that, let's transition into today's topic. So, strikeouts. This episode's been on the mind for a while, but I couldn't come up with that many just thinking of them. But by God's grace today, when I sat down to actually write down the few I could think of, that led to another one and another one. Talked about Patreon. I got on our Patreon chat. We chat quite often on our Patreon chat, and asked them, and they submitted some good ones too. Let's get into some strikeouts of striker fire pistols, right? And some of these, and hopefully you appreciate this about this podcast, I don't take any corporate sponsors. If a gun sucks, I'm going to tell you it sucks. Some of these guns are not good, to put it very plainly. Some of them were good and ahead of their time, or some of them were good but for some other market reason, didn't catch on. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And hopefully we'll get into them with some more specifics when we get into specific models of these guns. So let's start out. And these are in no particular order except the order I wrote them down in. And they're written in the margins of a composition notebook. So super official. How about the Beretta Nano? Now if you listen for any length of time, you know I like Beretta. Beretta makes really good quality guns. The Beretta Nano is kind of a flop, right? When's the last time you saw somebody's carry gun was a Beretta Nano? And by all accounts, the guns work well. They are a well-made gun. They are ugly to behold, unlike most things Beretta. Beretta usually makes some beautiful handguns. The Beretta 92, if you've listened, I think that's the finest combat handgun ever made. The Beretta Nano may possibly be at least in the top 10 for the ugliest handguns for carry ever made. Blocky, square, it has a weird grip angle, any one I've ever held, and I thought about buying these back in the day when there weren't nearly as many super small, compact, full-size round carry guns, and just the grip angle for me just was really odd. But the redeeming qualities, I'm sure that it works fine. Since they're not popular, you could probably get one for a good deal, and if you're not super married to a certain grip angle or another, then may not be an issue for you. I don't think, unlike some of the guns on this list, that it wouldn't be reliable or work. I think that it probably would. Also, this came out when 40 was a hot round. So you can get this super subcompact, tiny little gun, and I'm talking tiny, makes like a 365 look big, in a 40 Smith & Wesson. So if you really don't like your hands, you might go that route and get it in a 40 Smith & Wesson. I do believe that they exist. Could be wrong about that, but I seem to remember those coming out in 40 Smith & Wesson. Beretta Nano. Strikeout. The next one, sadly, I'm going to talk about is also Beretta. And it's the APX. And again, Beretta makes good guns. This gun, by all accounts, works fine. I think it's kind of an odd duck. It looks odd. And what does it really bring to the table that's not Glock? Because if you're coming to the market with a striker fire polymer handgun, you have to ask your question, why not a Glock? And sometimes there's a good reason for that. But I don't know that there's a good answer for that for the APX. It never really caught on. Let's talk about another really good company that made a gun that kind of flopped. And that is the Smith & Wesson Sigma. This was in the very early days of polymer striker fires. And this was, from what I understand, literally a Smith & Wesson copy of a Glock in that they got sued for it. I believe if, gun lore is true, I've never done this, so by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established. Try this for yourself. But I've heard that you can take the slide and frame off of one and mix match them and they'll work. So That's not cool. And again, why not a Glock? This thing basically was that, but by all accounts, not as good. So the Smith & Wesson Sigma was maybe one of the first, at least mainstream, strikeouts. The ones that I felt, if you describe a Glock trigger as dragging a piano down a dirt road, which is how I've described it in the past, you might describe this as dragging a piano down a dirt road with a donkey sitting on top of it and tied to that piano with some old lawn furniture. How's that for an analogy? The trigger pulls on these are really bad. Smith & Wesson Sigma. Now, how about Taurus? The Taurus Spectrum. This one was such a strikeout, I didn't even remember the name. I remembered the concept of it, which was a gun that came out in a bunch of pretty colors. And I initially typed in Taurus Spectre to give you an idea of how obscure this gun kind of has become in a short amount of time. The idea of this is a small compact carry gun. I think the big claim to fame for this one was going to be it's available in all kinds of colors. So it's available in like white and blue and your tactical colors and your black and your white and all kinds of colors. It's called the Spectrum. Yeah. So there's that. And it's on the strikeout list. Now I like guns in other colors. I'm not a big fan of black guns. I like my guns to be other colors. I don't generally wear the color black. Right? There's a reason I camo my holsters and generally don't run black guns. It's called concealed carry. It's a lot harder to conceal something if it's an entire different color. The human eye is attracted to movement, then color and shape. Try and break up that shape and that color with camo, not because I'm trying to be super tactical and sneak up on deer with my handgun, because I want it to blend in with what I'm wearing. Anyway, that being said, I don't really see the practicality of a super brightly colored peacock carry pistol. Anyway, with that, that is the Taurus Spectrum. How about another Taurus? This one would be the Taurus 24-7. The gun so good it shoots itself, much like the SIG 320. But the 320 has become quite popular, and they did fix that problem. But the 24-7, I think, suffered a similar thing in that it was not safe. It had some kind of safety recall issue, but it was a cheap, especially cheap compared to like a Glock on the market, 24-7 Taurus pistol. They've kind of come and went. The new Taurus polymer guns are the G3s, and from all accounts, and from my experience, Taurus has gotten a lot better on their kind of quality control than I believe they were in times past. And I'm not just picking on Taurus. Taurus does a lot of really cool stuff, and Taurus is not afraid to come out with cool new stuff, and I appreciate that about them. But that means inherently some of that stuff is not going to catch on. How about the Taurus Curve? The handgun that's literally bent to wrap around your body. Does that sound like a good idea? You answer that for yourself. But the Taurus Curve. Yeah, that was a real thing. That is a real thing. That's a gun that is bent to fit around your body. Also, a handgun I believe that has no iron sights. I'm not talking about cut for red dot. I mean no sights on it. Designed to be used with a laser, or I guess just point and click. So, have fun with that. I'm not just picking on Taurus here. Let's talk Glock. Because you think that everything that Glock has is a hit? When's the last time you picked up or handled or saw anybody carry a Glock 37, friends? The Glock 37 will bring us down a whole nother rabbit hole. Because the Glock 37 is chambered in 45 gap Glock automatic pistol. You never heard of the Glock 37? Have you ever even heard of 45 gap? Now, this is one of the ones I was talking about that it's a good gun. By all accounts, probably as reliable as any other Glock. And I think a good cartridge. The market just wasn't ready for it or didn't want it. But it's a good cartridge. You see, the 1911 45 ACP was designed, or at least adopted in 1911. It predates that a little bit, I'm sure, with development and R&D. But let's say, for argument's sake, 1911. The propellants we have today are better than what we had in 1911, right? We have better smokeless powder options than we had then. was kind of right at the dawn of that transition time into smokeless powders. We have better powders now. You can get that amount of powder to fit into a smaller case. Hence, you can make that .45 caliber round, you can shrink it to fit into roughly a 9mm size frame and retain the same amount of power as a .45 ACP. And they did, and they called it the .45 gap. I think it's a good concept. I think it has merit. It was adopted by some law enforcement agencies. They came out with the Glock 37, 38, and 39, respectively, I believe, big, medium, and small, or whatever Glock calls it, full size, compact, and subcompact. And I don't think the dimensions are identical, but they're roughly the same size as a 9mm frame gun. And you get it in .45 gap, which is 45, and again, you might argue about this nitpicking wise, but basically it gives you .45 ACP power in a 9mm size handgun. And if it recoils like a .45 ACP, I would probably rather shoot this than a .40 Smith & Wesson. So I think the concept was sound. I think the round was a good one, and the Glock 37 was probably a pretty reliable gun. It just didn't catch on, and this is one of those ones that wasn't a bad gun. It just kind of, nobody wanted it. So you've got that. So you've got all those Glocks, and how about the Glock 36? And ironically, this might be one of my favorite Glocks. This was my carry gun for a time. Think of these small single stack carry guns as something new. The Glock 36 has been around a long time. I believe it was Glock's first single stack in .45 ACP. It holds almost the same amount of rounds as a 1911, and I believe it's smaller, if I remember. I'm not looking it up, I'm just remembering by holding both. I believe it's smaller than a SIG 365, and this was a long, long time ago. Perhaps it didn't catch on because it was ahead of its time. Perhaps it didn't catch on because people a lot of times buy guns based on what's on paper, and they quickly came out with a double stack 45 that they called a compact or subcompact. It held more rounds, but it's a fat girl. I would much rather have a Glock 36. Perhaps it didn't catch on because shooting it felt like grabbing an aluminum baseball bat and hitting a concrete pillar. Perhaps that's why it didn't catch on. But it's oddly one of my favorite guns because I like a 1911, and it roughly gives you the same amount of firepower in a super small subcompact package. So if you see one, it's not in .45 gap, it's in regular old .45 ACP, the old American warhorse. So if you see one, don't turn your nose up at it. If you don't mind recoil, it's a good gun. But again, kind of a strikeout. When's the last time you saw somebody carry a Glock 36? Now, for the final one, I saved this one because this one's so obscure, I didn't even think about it. I was vaguely aware of its existence. I didn't even think it was a striker-fired gun because of how unconventional it looks. Now, we know Colt for making beautiful, finely made metal guns. For making high-quality stuff, for making really high-quality 1911s. They're kind of like the standard for that. They're also kind of the standard for AR-15s, right? Like the Colt 6920 is kind of the standard other things are measured against. Might get some that are maybe a little bit better higher end, like a Daniel Defense, but they're kind of measured against that Colt 6920. It is the kind of Honda Civic of ARs. Like it's kind of what you base other cars around. Well, you may not be aware that Colt came out with a striker fire handgun called the Colt All-American 2000. This thing has a distinction of striking out. From what I understand, I've never actually even seen one, I don't believe. But from what I hear the accounts, and again by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, so validate this through other sources, but in my opinion, it's an ugly gun. It kind of looks like a 1911 and a Glock and a high power got shoved in a bag and dumped out and put together. And by accounts are that the actual product, the end product, didn't work very well. Now that may or may not have been able to get fixed. A lot of guns when they very first come out have issues, but I don't think anybody wanted it in the first place. And by anybody, I mean the vast majority of people on the market didn't want it. By that time, I think a lot of people that were getting striker fires, and I could be wrong, were looking for polymer. That was the new hot thing. This was a big metal handgun. And if you don't want a Glock because you think they're not attractive looking, and I'm with you there, you certainly don't want this one, I don't think. I don't know anybody that would look at a Glock in this and say this looked better. Anyway, a gun so obscure, one of the patrons had to remind me that it existed. The Colt All-American 2000. Anyway, hopefully you guys liked this episode. This is really kind of just a lighthearted discussion about more obscure striker fire guns. I'm not a gun collector, but maybe you are. Maybe you want to pick one of these up just for collection. Maybe you want to steer clear of one of these if your buddy offers you one cheap and I've told you that it's not a good gun. Maybe you want to go verify that for yourself. And maybe say hard pass on that one, buddy. Anyway, if you saw any value in this, again, consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and going to Patreon. Either way, as a thanks for listening about all these obscure polymer striker-fired handguns, your tactical tip of the day. If you run Glocks, you may look at the back of that and see that hollow cavity and see a little hole in the back. No, that was not made for a grip plug. That's how a lot of people put in there now, is a grip plug. They run them like that, but that's not what it was designed for. That is a lanyard loop. A lot of times in the military, they specify that you have a lanyard on your gun. If you're in a vehicle convoy bouncing around, in combat, jumping through windows, things like that, there's a way to keep that handgun tethered to you. That's what that's for if you don't know. Also, that hollow space. That's not just an afterthought. That hollow space is there so you can grab the magazine in some kinds of malfunctions, like a double feed. You're supposed to be able to grab the front of that magazine, reach your hand up in that hollow space with your thumb, put your thumb in there, and grab that magazine hard, because sometimes with a malfunction, the magazine will not come out easily. That hollow cavity is meant to reach up in there and rip that magazine out. It's not just some cheap aftermarket hollow cavity back there. It's there to help you clear malfunctions. So part of your dry practice, your dry fire, and your live fire should be clearing malfunctions. If you run a Glock, try that. Try reaching in the back there when you get usually a double feed, both rounds trying to go in the chamber at the same time. You reach your thumb back there, grab it, and rip it out. Sometimes they can be in there a lot harder than others. Anyway, that's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. It's coming at you from 2 Corinthians. Not that we are sufficient in ourselves to think anything as being from ourselves, but our sufficiency is from God. If you're blessed with talent as a shooter, as a gunfighter, as anything like that, if you've made it through combat, made it through any kind of hard duty, don't think that it's you. Everything you have is a gift from God. You wouldn't have anything if He didn't first give it to you. You couldn't draw breath unless He allowed it. So if you're getting out there as a gunfighter, if you're getting out there and practicing and running and gunning, remember, God gave you the discipline to do that. God gave you the resources and the time to be able to do that, because you're not guaranteed another breath. So whatever you have, remember the giver, the source, God, the Almighty. With that, men, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.